Some of you probably have played chess before. Some of you have played chess and ended up becoming experts at the game. But the fact of the matter is, no matter where you are now, when you played chess, when you were a beginner, and then you first started to get the feel for the game, you got to the point where you were probably in a match and you found yourself in a situation or situations, in my case, where you think you've got someone. You all of a sudden realize that your mind's moving more than just one move ahead, and you think that you've got someone, and there is no more humbling and worse feeling in chess or in life than when you think you are the gotcha guy, and then you realize that the other guy's got you instead. And that checkmate comes out of nowhere. Well, our friends at a national outlet that shan't be named the other night on Twitter, they were in such a position. And they thought that they had you. And by you, I mean anyone who believes that star rankings matter. Now, this anonymous national media entity used 24/7 Sports as their database. I'm going to hold up what I'm talking about here. I think a lot of you probably saw this. Now, the context behind this little piece of paper I'm holding in my hand and the tweet that accompanied it basically said, doesn't matter how many stars you had coming out of high school. And the entire insinuation is those stars are irrelevant. And here's the evidence, okay? This is where they thought they had you. This is where they see your king there and they have moved the rook in for the kill. NFL draft by recruiting stars. I want you to keep in mind, someone with access to a national network's Twitter account put this out. All rounds of the 2020 NFL draft, only 15 players who were rated 5 stars in high school were drafted, but 77 players who were rated 4 stars were drafted. 111 players who were rated 3 stars were drafted. And there were 27 players who were rated 2 stars who were drafted. What does this mean? Stars are irrelevant, obviously. Now I want to read you some very interesting stats. Does anyone spot the problem here? It should be obvious if you have even a kindergarten equivalent of an understanding of math, logic, whatever the case may be. But if you don't, I want to provide some context here. In a given year, there are 32 5-star rated players here at 24/7 Sports. Any given cycle, you have about 300 kids who are rated 4-star, thereabouts. You have about 1,800 kids in any given cycle who are going to be rated 3 stars. And so now that we factor in the amount of said rated players, I want you to listen to what numbers say. The numbers for this last draft, for example, the odds of being a first-round pick in the last draft, the 2020 NFL draft, if you were a 5-star kid coming out of high school, it turns out your odds were 1 in 5 of going in the first round. If you were a 4-star, your odds were 1 in 21. Stars don't matter. Continuing, if you were a 3-star, stars don't matter, 1 in 184. If you were a 2-star or a 1-star, your odds were 1 in like 1,700. Point being, stars very much matter. It became in vogue when recruiting blew up, when the recruiting industry blew up, and this got really big, and everyone started talking about kids within the context of how many stars do they have next to their name. It became really in vogue for someone who wanted to carry the intellectual superiority in the room to say, stars don't matter. You know how I know? Because I know this kid who was rated 3 stars one time who went on to the NFL. Cool. What do the numbers say? Like, do we understand percentages? Do we understand odds? Do we understand how any of this works? So our Bud Elliott put out a really good piece that he probably was able to write months ahead of time because everyone knows what the popular arguments are going to be coming out of the NFL draft. And sure enough, they take the bait, do the, I guess, high school interns that are running the social media feed for said national entity. I want you to listen to these key numbers. Again, there's no opinion here. These are just data. They don't really care about how you feel about it. 4 and 5 stars made up just 7% of recruits, yet 66% of the first round picks. 4 and 5 star recruits were 29 times more likely to be number 1 picks than other D1 recruits. 2020 first round, it had the highest average star rating of any draft in history. The average star rating coming out of high school for kids who were drafted in the first round of this draft was 3.75 stars. That is astronomically high. I want you to remember the context here. You're not born a 4-star. You're not born a 5-star. There are tens of thousands of kids who play high school any given year. And it is up to to be honest with you, a pretty small number on a ratings council like at 24/7 Sports to comb the entire country, watch, scout, grade, and assign a star rating. To understand how good this process has become is to understand how significant these numbers are. There was only one player rated 2-star or less out of high school who was taken first round this year. That's a new record. Again, 4 and 5-star kids. They made up just 7% of recruits, but 66% of first-round picks this year. Translation, they're doing an awesome job at rating 4-star, 5-star kids. And it doesn't mean that you don't have a path to the draft or the first round or the Hall of Fame if you're a 3-star kid. It just means there are other factors in play, which circles around to what I actually wanted to talk about, and that is what a recruiting ranking is. I think to nail down what a recruiting rating is and to wipe out about 90% of the garbage that goes into quote-unquote debating this stuff, you have to understand what the rating itself is. Now, I'm giving you my interpretation here. This is not Bud Elliott. This is not Barton Simmons. I listen to the guys talk all the time. I listen in on the recruiting calls and the rating councils meetings all the time because it's fascinating to me. I don't even take part in the conversation. I'm not on the council. I just listen in because I want context. It gets pretty vicious. It's like a knife fight in a conference call setting sometimes about how thorough they want to get in evaluating these guys. There are so many misconceptions I used to hear before I came to work here. One is, well, once they see an offer sheet that starts beefing up, they got to bump the kid's rating up. Garbage. Doesn't happen. Well, once a kid commits to this school, then they got to bump the rating. Garbage. Doesn't happen. Flat out doesn't happen. In fact, it's such garbage that in the council themselves, they'll sit there and be aware of that stigma and be worried about bumping a kid because they think they're going to have to deal with that. That's how thorough they are. But let's think about what a recruiting rating is. A recruiting ranking to me has always been a raw, talent-based rating of a kid based on who they are right now, what we may project them to be, but it's all based on what we have to go on right now, right this second, when they're a junior or a senior in high school. That's not important. It seems to me what's more important is to talk about what a recruiting ranking is not. I wrote down some things. A recruiting ranking is not a psychological profile of a kid. If there are serious potential character concerns from the neck up, it doesn't show up on their huddle film. It doesn't show up when you go watch them at the All-American games. It doesn't show up when you go watch them at a 7-on-7 tournament. I don't know if you have flawed character, okay? Reality is that could very much end up with you not maximizing your potential at the next level. Is that a recruiting bust? Is that a star rankings bust? Or is that just stuff you could have never known? It is not an intelligence test. It is not an aptitude test. It's not a prediction of whether you'll be able to avoid freak injuries in high school that could or college that could derail your career. And a recruiting ranking is not a magic 8-ball that can let everyone know how you're going to handle the social change that comes in the transition from high school to college. And my point is, I just pointed out a lot of things that could potentially derail a high 4-star kid's career. If any of those happen, are they recruiting busts? When we look at kids who don't pan out, rated 5 stars, 4 stars, etc., how many times do you trace it back and look at them in high school and say, oh, they were just overrated? Look at that. They were a model citizen in college. They never suffered major injury. They kept their head on straight, kept their nose clean. They were given tons of opportunity, and they just never fulfilled what we thought their potential was. That happens. I would argue 5-to-1, 10-to-1 ratio more times than not. It's, well, kid didn't keep his nose clean. Well, he had injury. I mean, who could have seen back-to-back ACL tears coming in consecutive years? Well, the transition from a small town to a really big university, he just didn't handle it well. Had some character issues that we couldn't have seen. If a kid washes out because of those reasons, to me, it's not a recruiting bust. It's never been a recruiting ranking bust. You just need to understand when you see a star rating next to a kid's name, that star rating doesn't represent 100% of the formula of what it's going to take for him to succeed at the college level. It does have a lot to do with talent, skill, or maybe raw intangibles, measurables, and talents that you think and you project will translate into skills that could make you elite at the next level. It's not an aptitude test. It's not a character test. It's not a social test. So there are a lot more things that go into making you fulfill that potential in college than just talent-based ratings. But yet that's what you have to go on if you're trying to rate kids coming out of high school. So it really aggravates me when folks talk about recruiting bust and star ratings bust, and you never hear the context about what went into said player being a bust at the next level. I'd also encourage you, by the way, to look up Bud's piece on that. And I'm going to talk some more about this on the Sunday show. But Chris Hummer put out a fantastic article, a really deep dive. Earlier today, I think it was posted. If you go to 247sports.com, you'll be able to look it up on once these programs get kids on campus, which ones are investing in all sorts of different areas to maximize their potential and to develop. In other words, who is developing the talent the best once they get it on campus. You won't be too shocked to know who's at the top of the list.